So, welcome everybody to a new episode of the Solar Journey. And today we have a new guest, and he's called Harald Överholm. Hello, Harald. Harald, I just learned that's the way we should pronounce it in Swedish.
Thank you, Torsten.
Yeah.
That was really well done, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Harald is a Swedish citizen, and he lives in the beautiful city of Stockholm, Sweden. And he's the co-founder and CEO of Alight. That's the leading PPA, power purchase agreement provider in the Nordics. But before we go into that, let me just outline his CV. So yeah, when I looked at it there, it starts with an odd occasion, and maybe we can switch back to that later. So in just before the century changed, in 2000, he was the CTO of Fork Unstable Media in Hamburg. So he was based in Germany for some time. And that was actually, it seems, before he actually went to university. So I'll definitely come back to that. He finished a degree in industrial engineering of energy systems in 2007 at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, in Stockholm, I think it is. Yeah. And he was also in Cambridge in the UK. He did a PhD there with a focus on the market development of the US solar PPA market. So he's actually a real trained PPA specialist.
Right.
So that was also interesting to see. I didn't know that, that the PPAs are that old that you can already do a degree in it. But maybe it all starts now with his PhD work as the first lecture book on that topic. We'll also discover that. And yeah, then he became, after his degree, his PhD, he became the investment director at Sustainable Technologies Funds in Stockholm, Sweden. And he did that until 2012. That's a Nordic venture capital fund focused on clean tech investments, funded with 58 million by institutional investors, mainly by the Swedish pension funds. And yeah, he was also chairman of the board of two other companies. And from 2014 until 2015, he became chairman of the board of Vireo Energy. That's a renewable energy utility, primarily in the bioenergy area. And that's a company part of the Kinnevik Group, which is a gigantic company because it's got 5 billion euros in assets. So that's also interesting, I think, to understand what that company does. So we'll need to talk a lot about your CV before we actually come to your current position.
If you like.
And yeah, then that's also interesting. He went from the, let's say, business side of things to the, how can I put it, institutional public sector. He became part of the Solar Energy Association of Sweden. And he also became an external associate of the Stockholm Environment Institute. He did that for 6 years. And the Stockholm Environment Institute, they do independent research for environmental policy. It's funded by the Swedish government, and it's ranked the most influential environment think tank in the world. It got that title in 2016. So Harald did a lot of thinking there, and this, I'm sure, was then also later on the basis for his new company. But he also...
Yeah, well, all of that was actually in parallel. So that's...
Okay.
I mean, many of those things were things that I've done just on the side while setting up Alight.
Okay, good. And then you also a member, and you still are member of the IEA PVPS work group on photovoltaics and utilities. So the IEA, that's the International Energy Agency.
Yeah.
That's an agency funded by countries, the is it OECD? No, which
I think it's like a part of almost the UN system, but to be honest, I'm a little bit unsure. So
yeah, so the many big nations are part of the IEA.
Yeah,
and yeah, so they do an important job, but they are also criticized for various things. Maybe we can also touch ground on that. And now we finally come to Alight. In 2013, he founded Alight, and he's now the CEO of Alight. And Alight helps companies across Europe to switch to solar, save money, and do good now and in the long term. And as I mentioned earlier, they provide power purchasing agreements, mainly in the Nordics, I guess. Yeah. So a great CV, pretty interesting. We can spend a lot of time talking only about that and the experience you did.
Happy to.
Let's see how we handle that. So thanks a lot for Harald for coming onto the show. Let's start in the beginning. You know, I'm the CEO of a company myself, and I like to look at the odd spots in the CV, because maybe sometimes they tell you a lot, maybe nothing, but sometimes they do. So you were in Hamburg before you went to university, correct? Yeah. So what did you do at Fork Unstable Media?
It was the crazy 90s, internet days. I started my career in like high growth Swedish internet startups before going to university. So I was I think I was 16 when I started coding HTML. It's like 96, and then I ended up in Germany, in Hamburg. So first working with a Swedish company, but then I switched over to an even cooler German/American company, and a good friend of mine, called David Lindemann, was running it together with some German partners, and they were, I think, definitely the coolest guys around. At least I thought so. My 18-year-old me thought so. And yeah, I mean, we were just doing web pages, so it wasn't more advanced than that. But it was a great time. I loved Hamburg. It was a fantastic city.
I managed to come to Hamburg once in a while. My parents live in that area, so Hamburg is great.
Of course, as an 18-year-old young internet professional, I had to live very close to the Reeperbahn, in these in the complete red light district. It was very messy. For someone from Stockholm, it was like a world I had never seen before. So it actually left a really strong impression in terms of just different lifestyle.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that assignment ended in 2000. You were part of the internet bubble bust, or is it?
No, not the bust, just the bubble.
The bubble, yeah.
Because I realized I had to go to university, so I kind of left. I left the whole scene and went back to university, and then the bubble bust. So
before that, right?
Good timing, actually.
You enjoyed the good time. You only had enjoyed the good time. You didn't have to go through the downturn. Yeah. So then you realize, well, I guess you need a proper degree, a proper education. You went to university, even finished that phase with a Ph.D. And as I mentioned earlier, so you did the Ph.D. on the PPA market in the US. Yeah. I came to know about PPAs a lot later. Maybe you can sketch out the history of PPAs. I'm sure you covered that in your introduction.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so PPA, it's a power purchase agreement, and I mean, it's just a way to make sure that new power is packaged really neatly and simply for an actual power user. So someone who's using power, I mean, that can be actually a residential household, or it can be a big company using power. It doesn't matter. It's just someone who's using power, and suddenly they can just buy that power from a new power plant. So like from something new that's built for them, solar or wind as well. You see PPAs in wind. And it's really simple for them. So all they have to do is to sign a contract, and then someone else will deliver the power for a good price, probably a locked-in price from this new asset. And this is actually it's the concept of doing that, of like packaging power in that way, came out of the US. It started before solar, but then before solar, it was only done for really big things. And that's kind of like grew a little bit in the 80s and in the 90s. But then in the early 2000s, a bunch of entrepreneurs in the US saw that this was a way to make solar happen. Because in Europe and in other places, solar was happening because the government was like paying for all the electricity. But that wasn't the case in the US. So in the US, if you wanted to make solar happen, you had to find someone who's going to pay for the electricity. And to do that, you had to find a sophisticated business model and kind of make it work. And that became PPA. Yeah. So the first company was a company called SunEdison, and an entrepreneur whose name is Jigar Shah, who is an important guy today. I mean, he's very influential kind of thinker today, and he's running a fund called Generate Capital in San Francisco. But he had a very strong vision about how PPAs could become the way to make solar grow. And then he set up SunEdison and he made that happen. And he kind of proved the model, and he proved it so well that, you know, it's like 100 other companies in the US just took on from that point and did it for every particular customer niche you can think of. I mean, from the smallest residential to the absolutely biggest solar parks around and across the US. And that has been going on in the US since about, I think 2005 was when Jigar signed the first PPA for solar with Whole Foods or Staples. I can't really remember, one of those two. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, the US market has been growing super fast. So when I got there in 2010 to do my research for my PhD, it was already a 5-year-old market with very strong growth trajectory. So there was a lot to do research on. And then, as you correctly point out, I mean, it came to Europe a lot later. So it came to Europe like in 2016, 2017, we started seeing really like the first kind of PPA trend in Europe. So, I mean, it took 10 years, but there's a bunch of clear reasons for why it took so long for it to move from the US to Europe. But yeah.
Good. Excellent. And can you outline what was the key result of your PhD? What was the biggest learning?
Well, look, you know, like a PhD on the academic side of things, it's just like super esoteric. You have to position yourself in this like strange academic dialogue. And I mean, I'm not going to bore you with the academic findings because they are very, very difficult to make to make lively and interesting. But I'm going to say that for me personally, like the biggest finding out of the PhD was that it gave me a license to go to the US and meet with that whole market and just, you know, meet all these entrepreneurs. Someone like Jigar, who to me, before I did my PhD, I knew about Jigar and I thought he was like an idol. I mean, like people would view Elon Musk today, basically. And then suddenly I was doing this PhD and I was just spending like 10 hours, you know, with Jigar, interviewing him in detail on exactly how he built this company. And to me, that was just like, yeah, it's just the most amazing experience. I mean, these were American, super successful entrepreneurs in a business model that I thought was maybe the most, I mean, seriously, like the most important business model that I could ever think of. And then I was just allowed to sit and interview them, much like you yourself get the chance, you know, to interview, like there's a context, you have some kind of right to ask a lot of questions to someone. Yeah, and I got to do that over the course of 2 years, and yeah, I just learned so much. It was, so I don't know if that's a clear finding. The finding for me was just, it was just massive inspiration.
Yeah. Are you still in contact with Jigar Shah? Did you manage to keep in touch?
A little bit, like, but there was a point after, I think in 2013 or 2014, after I was done with the PhD, and then he decided to set up Generate Capital. And I remember emailing him, and then I got this automated reply saying, from this point on, I'm no longer available to just have a coffee and a bit of a chat. So I think he realized that he's put himself in a position where a lot of people were just like asking him for a lot of advice, and then he wanted to move on and set up Generate Capital, and he had cut down a little bit on that. But I've had the privilege of having other mentors from the US as well. So both someone called David Busby, who was also part of setting up SunEdison, and then he's also set up Sunrun and STEM. He was very useful during the first years of Alight in helping us out. So very grateful to him. And now, these days, we've actually established, I've established a relationship with a guy called Peter Rive, who is a part of setting up Solar City, and then Tesla Energy. So Pete is actually on our webpage now as a kind of a senior advisor and someone who is regularly coaching me on, again, just bringing the experience of the PPA market that has been going on for a long time. And I mean, he's seen enormous growth in that market, and he can just help us to problem solve at the stage that we're in Europe. And yeah, it's we keep looking at the American market as a really important roadmap for where we are going here.
Yeah. Fascinating. Super cool that you have these outside input, and it seems that quite often in the US you have business models developed a lot earlier than in Europe, for example, right? My dad used to travel as an engineer very often, like in the 80s, 90s to the 70s, to the US for in the automotive industry, right? And yeah, also back then he always brought back the coolest toys and stuff to wear, like frisbee skateboards, right? And he always said, like, whatever is developed there, it takes 10 to 20 years before it hits Europe, right? And with the PPAs,
right. Well, there you go.
And PPAs, exactly 10 years, right? As you mentioned. And before it goes big, now it's 15 years, right?
It was the coolest toy, And
yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. And then you went on to Sustainable Technologies Funds. That was, in a way, then for 3 years, your first proper job with a degree, the way I understand your CV, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, or just to set the timeline straight here, so actually, I went to university, I did a degree in engineering, then I worked as a venture capitalist for about 6 years in the clean tech.
Ah, that's in parallel. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I kind of took time out and went to Cambridge to do my PhD
right.
in the US. So I just
okay.
Straight. But yeah, I mean, I was a VC in the clean tech space for 6 years. That was an amazing experience. And just got to see so many companies and so many passionate entrepreneurs trying to solve environmental questions through entrepreneurship. And I kind of saw, the good and the bad and the ugly of that. So lots of findings, and really excited.
Yeah. What did you move in the first place to move into the renewable space? You started off with as a media guy, designing websites. How did that change?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that period really reflected any deeper sense of direction. That was 16, and I actually got a job. That's like when you're 16, you're kind of happy to get a job to start with, and then it was,
you were young and needed the money. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now I think like, to me, really, I've been in renewables basically my whole career, 15 years, and also the university degree that I did was in renewables, and it does reflect. It reflects a calling. I mean, definitely, it reflects like the most apparent logic is just that climate change is like a really, really stupid thing. It's just not. It's you don't have to be political about it in any way. It's just logic. It's just such a stupid thing, and we all kind of know. I think, okay, maybe this is controversial, but we all kind of know that fossil fuels should be banned. Basically, I mean, it's such an apparent insight, but we all kind of also realize that there's no way we can ban fossil fuels unless we have some kind of proper alternative, because otherwise it's just crazy. We don't have any energy, and like that would sound like the collapse of civilization, and we don't want to go down that route. So when you think of it, it's just this massive and super stupid question that just has, but the only logical answer is an answer you can only get there if you develop alternatives. So when you just do that little loop in your head, you just keep ending up in, well, I mean, it really makes sense to put all of your effort into helping, develop the alternative that will help us ban fossil fuels. And I think, that's just a little loop that's been playing in my head for a very long time. And it just feels like self-evident thing to be working on. So unless the loop stops playing at some point, I mean, as far as I can tell, it's the only thing I should be doing.
Yeah. You've got a degree in industrial engineering, so you could have chosen the more technical part of the business.
Yeah.
How did it come about that you felt, well, I'm more on the business side of things and deal structures, PPAs, etc. Right? You could have developed
question.
turbines or software.
Yeah, but I think it's like I think that it's a really good question, because I think it comes back to bottleneck thinking, right? I think it's just me asking myself, like, really, if you want to change something in this market, where's the bottleneck? And for me, really early on, I realized that there was this. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna go on a little tangent here, but there was this like epiphany for me. I remember it was 2006, and I just got my first job in finance, renewable finance, and they sent me to Milan to EUPVSEC, which is a massive. Still today, it's a massive conference.
We could have met there. Maybe we did, without knowing.
Yeah, maybe we did. Yeah. We had a coffee, like 15 years ago. Yeah. So I went to EUPVSEC, and because I came out of the Nordics, I kind of didn't know that much about PV, because renewables for us was like wind and biomass. So I thought, like, a PV conference, I thought it was going to be kind of like futuristic, a bit fuzzy. And then I turned up at PPAs, and it was like a ready to go industry. I mean, it was a global industry of professionals, and it was just there, it was just working. It left such an enormously strong impression on me that I just felt like, look, I don't know what we're waiting for. Like, obviously this technology is just completely done. It's like packaged, it's working, it's professional. Like, these guys just know how to do it. And I mean, first of all, I felt like, I want to be a part of this, because this is it's so modular, it's so flexible, it's like something you can deploy everywhere. But secondly, and this comes back to your original question, like, what's the bottleneck here? Because the bottleneck is not the technology, because it's there. And the bottleneck does not seem to be, anything else that needs any particular kind of technical innovation at that point. The bottleneck just seemed to be, how is this going to end up on every rooftop and every, how are we going to deploy this at this rate, at the speed that we need to make an impact? And the more I thought about that, the more my conclusion was that commercial business models, that's really the real bottleneck, because there's only two ways that you can kind of deploy solar at scale. The one way is by asking the government to subsidize it, and the other way is to find commercial use for it, so power users actually pay for it. And the government way, it works, but it's always risky, because then you change government and then suddenly you have nothing, and you get these complete boom and bust cycles. And it's just like it doesn't feel like a long-term way of doing things. Whereas commercial business models, if they work, if you really deliver value to the people who use power in this world, then, as far as I could tell, it would be something that would grow over time, and and become just more and more important the larger it got. So yeah, that was the thinking.
Excellent. So, but yeah, that's real entrepreneurial thinking, right? So where's the problem here? And I want to be part of the solution. So
yeah,
interesting. Yeah, very good. And as we continue with your CV, so you joined two, let's say, non-business, non-profit, put it this way, non-profit organization. That's the Stockholm Environment Institute and the IEA. So what drove you there? So what was the thinking behind that?
Well, yeah, I think it comes back to having, a deeper purpose or a passion for the market, and the passion for the ultimate outcome of the market. So to the extent that I can be of any use outside of what we do as a company, I try to make time to do that. So I've been on the board of the Swedish Solar Association. It was in the early days, there's just really few people in the Swedish solar industry, so just helping to set it up felt like, if it helps the industry, it's a good thing. I don't think typically in our industry, we all just need the industry to grow. We just need the awareness of this to grow. It's not about competing with each other primarily. It's about building an industry together and an ecosystem together. And I think as an entrepreneur, it's actually an important part of what you're doing is to. And again, I was inspired by Jigger as well. I mean, what did he do? He built Sun Edison to a great company, but then he spent like hours and hours sitting with me, just telling me what he had done so that I could put that into articles and tell other people about it. I mean, in someone like that, considered it a priority to help teach others and teach the ecosystem, then surely, you know, that's the right thing to do. I just felt like that's a part of being an entrepreneur. If you believe in what you're doing, is that you help build your industry.
Yeah. So so you're still on part of the IEA, but so both let's say it's a part-time job, or it's just a.
No, I mean, it's not even a job. Like the IEA thing is,
Yeah.
I'm a member of a forum, and they kind of call. We have like a yearly meeting, and we share some information in between that, and we just try to take time to educate each other on whatever we are learning about in the market. And the focus of that forum is in business models. So
Yeah.
the business model side of solar.
Yeah. Good.
But no, it's not a job. Like it's no one's they're not paying me.
Yeah. Good. What do you think about the IEA? I mean, there's the Dutch professor Arno Hoekstra. He puts out these graphs where, you know, the IEA forecasts a flat development of the future for the PV employment, and of course it goes. The growth is actually exponential. So you wonder why the IEA is so off with their prediction. It seems to me, and I try to start a conversation with them, that, and the way they present themselves is, I might sense there's a change in policy maybe, but why was it so bad, and what do you think? How are they playing it now, right? What's their real objective? I mean, this is the underlying criticism, right? Are they? What's the real objective here? Right? Are they really trying to promote renewables, or what is it about?
Yeah, right. Well, that's a good question. I have almost no insight into the IEA because I mean I sit in this like network that's organized by the IEA, but it's really like on the side of the organization. So I think I'm the wrong person to ask about, you know, that particular thing. But I have seen the graphs as well that you're talking about, the Hoekstra, and I think they're amazing. And without knowing anything, you know, that you don't know, I just think they illustrate how linear thinking is just wrong typically. I mean, if you want me to, you know, I'll spend, maybe if I can just spend a few minutes on this in terms of solar, because I think I have a very strong opinion here on what's happening going forward. And I think solar has been and will be increasingly. It's one of these cases of growth is driven by a lot of overlapping trends. Some of these trends are like technology trends. Some of these trends are like market and customer perception trends. But solar is driven by all of them and by kind of, you know, the overlap of them in just the same way that, you take some simple example, take like the iPhone. Like, why could this iPhone suddenly emerge and then get really big? It wasn't because one thing was done right. It was because it was like a point in time where a lot of things started to converge. The cost of certain technologies, the quality of certain technologies, customer demand, the quality of like the internet connections, etc. So when a lot of things suddenly intersect in terms of trends, then suddenly you can get explosive developments, and they're never linear, you know, because linear developments, they are the product of just like one cost point slowly moving in one direction, and then something is like increasingly added every year.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole problem of trying to forecast solar. Typically, when people forecast solar, they just look at like one parameter, like what's the development of LCOE over time, and then they kind of extrapolate that into a fairly linear curve. But if you look at what's actually going on in the market, it's just like 10 different trends that are overlapping each other, and the effect of that just keeps being something that surprises everyone. And I think it's gonna that's just going to go on. You have the exponential surprises to everyone's linear charts.
Yeah, yeah. Good. So where do you, in terms of power sources, where do you see the share of all those different renewable energy sources? So we have PV, solar thermal, we have wind, we have hydro, geothermal, wave energy. Yeah, I mean all the gases are just storage means. So where do you see do you dare a forecast on the share of those different technologies? I mean, some say it's going to be only solar and wind, and the rest will be just single-digit percentage.
Yeah, I'm not going to do a forecast because simply because I haven't done one. Like, it's not my day job, so I don't sit on any kind of forecasting model. But my strong view in terms of the trend is that there are a number of things that are unique with solar that makes me think that solar is going to be the dominant power source in the fairly near future. So like the next 1 to 2 decades. And I'm just going to say like the couple of things that I always come back to. The first one being what we call bankability in our sector, but just the fact that solar is so well proven that everyone in the world is kind of willing to finance solar for almost nothing, and they're willing to create everything else that you need for actual technology deployment, like insurance, or like you have a super long-term guarantees or like product guarantees, or you have people willing to do O&M over the long term. All of these things are in place for solar. They're not in place for a lot of the other technologies, but and that's why you're getting a lock-in effect in solar being very, very easy to deploy. Mm-hmm. Secondly, obviously, solar is basically the cheapest one in terms of LCOE today. And it's just, as far as we can tell, it just keeps the economies of scale just keep pushing down that cost point. So it's likely to stay the cheapest. Thirdly, it's the most modular and most flexible. So you can do it small, you can do it big, you can do it whatever, floating on a lake, you can do it pretty much anywhere you want. So I think the combination of those factors just leads to a very strong kind of lock-in effect in terms of future power being like, well, why not just make it solar? That's the easiest. Let's just keep rolling out solar. That's always the easiest.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing your views on that. And what about storage? Where is this headed? I mean, with the larger portion of generation, we need this becomes more and more important, together with EVs and all the national activities, at least here in Europe. And hydrogen and lithium are everybody's looking at those two. Where do you see prices and the level of usage in the industry?
I mean, storage is going to be super important, and that's because it's going to turn solar into more or less kind of base load power in the end. And it's going to balance the grids. So it's going to provide reliability services back to the grid. So in terms of frequency regulation and voltage regulation and all of these things that, I mean, ultimately the grid needs a lot of support back from renewables in order to work. So storage will do all of these things. And I think there are a number of bottlenecks at the moment in storage that are really interesting because they will change over the near term, like over the next 1, 2, 3 years. They're going to change really rapidly in Europe. And actually, again, we're seeing that happening in the US even faster. And I think the two important bottlenecks in storage are, the first one is digital. It's about automating kind of market participation of storage. I'm not talking about the battery management system, which is like digital and tells the battery exactly what to do. I'm talking about how the battery takes part in market transactions. Just teaching the batteries to participate in markets, to trade frequency regulation, to trade kilowatt hours, to trade together with the inverter, trade voltage. So this is just about making sure that the batteries is an automated kind of participant in markets. super important, and it's kind of difficult to get that right. And there's not that many platforms out there to do it today. So it's something where you need to put in a lot of digital development to make it work. The other side of that, the other big development that's happening, but it's going to make a big impact, is to open up marketplaces for storage. So because again, storage can provide a lot of like other things than just kilowatt hours. It can provide frequency regulation, for example. But you need marketplaces that puts a price tag on those services, and you need those marketplaces to become kind of sophisticated. You need liquidity, which means just like you just need a lot of people to be trading on the marketplaces. You probably need some contract functions. You can do long-term contracting, etc. And all of this is happening. I mean, it's opening up across Europe. The grid operators are opening up marketplaces for this. And the better those marketplaces become, and the better we get at digitally automating the participation of storage in that, the more this is going to just be a no-brainer and something that we deploy everywhere.
Yeah. So did I understand that correctly? So basically, storage is doesn't just create value from providing energy, but for example, the frequency stabilization is a value of its own. So you could put a price tag on that, for example, as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think when you look at the long term, what's going to happen with the grids and what will need to happen in order to move to a very highly renewable energy system, then these services are going to get so much more valuable. So even if the price tag on frequency regulations might be low today, or it might be difficult to actually reach or to actually find the right price point, I think we can be more or less certain that that's going to be a very economically valuable thing to provide just a few years from now. Yeah. So it's like a, as a parallel value stream from solar and storage that's just going to become really, really important going forward.
Yeah, interesting. Any other extra value? So it's the power itself, it's the frequency. Any other new feature of electricity?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of features, and so there's like when you talk about the reliability of the grid, I mean, there's like a cluster. There's like a cluster of things you want to do. You want to be able to, but they all boil down to three things. It's either kilowatt hours, that you move the kilowatt hours in time in one or another way. Yeah. It's frequency, you do something with the frequency, or it's voltage, so you do something with the voltage level. And actually on the voltage level, we're able to use the inverters to provide reliability services on the voltage level. But that's also something where it's underdeveloped today because we need more sophisticated software to do it, and we need marketplaces to open up that we can participate in. So I think ultimately solar, as people have been experimenting with this in California, again, of course, California, like it's always California where they do things. But like First Solar, I know they did like a 700 megawatt installation in California where they were selling reliability services back to PG&E. And they just did fantastically well with that. And they were able to show that if you optimize a solar asset for reliability services rather than just kilowatt hour production, you can get amazing results and better results than the equal or the kind of the same level deployment of, for example, gas peakers, which would be an alternative way to provide reliability services. So I think there might come a point fairly soon when we start optimizing solar assets for reliability rather than energy production. And that's going to be the foundation of a solid long-term development of renewables.
Yeah, fascinating. Talking about California, that's also the country where there's frequent blackouts, and PG&E, they didn't make it through the last fires.
Yeah.
What do you have a opinion or understanding of what that happens? Because I mean, you could think, well, if they are so advanced in their business models and technology, why do they have these blackouts? And many, of course, then critics then blame the renewables for overloading or the grid, right?
I mean,
opinion or knowledge on
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give a specific opinion on the current blackouts in California because I just don't know that well. I mean, it's a very specific market. But I do want to say and come back to that. There's a massive underutilized potential of renewable assets to provide reliability services to the grid. So of course, like in places like California, it's the same in Germany. We have a lot of deployment of solar assets since way back. But the vast majority of this deployment is completely like stupid, if you like. I mean, it's just kilowatt hours, completely weather dependent. Just push it out into the grid whenever the sun is producing. That's it. I mean, that's so unnecessary. Like we would be able to, if we were more coordinated here as a society or as a grid, we would make sure to open up the marketplaces very quickly that would put a serious price tag on the ability of all these solar assets to provide reliability services, because then they could shift over to doing that even without adding storage. They could utilize the inverters better to provide reliability, and you would give everyone a bit of an impulse to add storage quickly to the assets. So I think it's a lot of I mean, is solar to blame for anything? Well, I mean, certainly if you put a lot of solar into a grid, but only on the kind of the kilowatt hour side, but you just don't allow for those assets to provide anything else, then I mean, that's not really sustainable in the very long term.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Plenty to learn, plenty to develop in the markets, technology.
Yeah, but I think so.
Otherwise, yeah.
This is where entrepreneurial opportunities are opening up at this point. I think on a very large scale.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump to what you're doing now. You co-founded and you're the CEO of Alight, and as I mentioned, you're the leading solar power purchase agreement provider in the Nordics. So first of all, why did you get started? Why did you found this company? You could have stayed on in previous jobs and do it from there. Try to convince the CEO and say, "Hey, we need to do PPAs."
Yeah. I guess I suppose. But look, like as an investor, you're not supposed to kind of tell your entrepreneurs what to do. So when you find yourself that you want to start telling everyone else what to do, then you realize you have to become an entrepreneur yourself. Because that's the best way to get it done, right? So this was a gap in the market, and I mean,
again, you saw the gap, and
we had a vision of like setting up a leading European company that would do subsidy-free solar as more or less baseload. And save money for power users across Europe, and turn it into a commercial business model. So, and at the time, and we had the vision, and we just couldn't see that anyone else was doing it in what we felt was a solid way. So we felt, we felt that let's just someone has to do this. Let's get it done.
Yeah, cool. So who's we?
So that's me and my co-founders at that point. So
okay,
and Richard, who's our CFO, and William, who's doing site development for us. So they're still with me in the company. And but now it's 30 people in the company. So now we has become bigger.
Okay, 30 people.
And we have and we have a bunch of investors, etc. So I guess we now is like a big community.
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. All right, but you founded the company. There was two of you.
Three.
Okay. Yeah. Good. 30 people now. Can you give us a rough indication on the revenue and the size of the company? How many customers you have got? Just to give an idea.
Yes, I mean we're still a small company. We set up ourselves. We've done about 40 customer installations, PPAs, but we came out of the rooftop side of things. So whereas some of the people have done solar parks in Europe, they've deployed hundreds of megawatts of solar, but maybe through 2 or 3 PPA contracts. For us, it's just been the other way around. We've done 40 PPA contracts, but still, we're around 25 megawatts or 30 megawatts. Now pushing into a very large pipeline because increasingly we are doing off-site solar parks, so that's so much bigger. But and revenue this year is going to be about 10 million euros. We just did the largest solar park in Sweden, which is still not very large. It's like 12 megawatts, And someone came directly afterwards and said, "Oh, look, we have the largest solar park, and it's like 12.5 or something. So maybe it's not the largest anymore." But now we're also working across Europe. So since 1 year back, we've pushed very fast to get out into the European market and position ourselves as a PPA solar expert, very focused on rolling out solar PPAs for large companies.
Yeah. So what exactly is your business model? You also build the plants, the parks, the solar plants?
Yeah, we contract.
You're the EPC. You're an EPC. No. Who
we
builds?
Coordinate. We coordinate the EPC. We contract someone to be the EPC, and we have strong opinions about the EPC work. We have engineers that kind of think around obviously what we want to build, but we want to contract EPCs. I mean, it's a great market. You have really experienced European EPCs out there, so it doesn't make any sense to build that on your own.
Okay.
So we're very good at what we want to find the customer and sign the PPA. Good at kind of going to finding the right EPC to build it for us, having the long-term capital, so that we're really the long-term owner or the long-term controller of the assets, which means that we can serve the customer over the long time, but also means that we can add these new revenue streams over time. We can build reliability services over time.
So you also own, but you own the park.
Yeah, we have so we own it, but we use asset financing from big pension funds to own the assets, but we control that financing, and we control the assets over the long term. So
you can be regarded an IPP. Is that correct?
Yeah, we get some new. I mean, in Europe, the IPPs were typically people who just own these really passive assets, like the feed-in tariff assets. And I mean, we're more of like an operational IPP. I mean, we're an IPP within PPA. There's lots of too many strange abbreviations in that sentence.
Yeah.
But it's like we have similarities to IPPs. I'm not sure if we're totally similar to the European IPP.
Yeah, just to explain the abbreviation. So IPP means independent power producer. In contrast to, like, let's say, the established utilities, like, as you mentioned earlier, PG&E in the US, or I don't know, Vattenfall known in Europe, or E.ON and RWE in Germany.
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't match one of those categories because but you own the asset. Okay, finance through pension funds, and then you provide the electricity through PPAs to end customers. So
yeah, it's a different beast. Like in European solar terms, we're kind of a different beast. In Europe, you're typically seen as either a developer or an IPP, and we're kind of like something else. We tried to do whatever Sun Edison was doing or Solar City was doing in the US, and they were not really called either developer or IPP. They were kind of called, I don't know, solar PPA companies, like solar service companies sometimes.
Okay.
I guess we have to find some kind of new funky term for us to use.
So let's switch briefly to another aspect. So you founded the company, a few guys. Now you're 30 people. What was the biggest learning for you, right? I went through that process myself multiple times, and it's a different thing than having a job in a company. What was the biggest learning? What was maybe also your biggest mistake, if you dare to share?
No, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
No, but I think like the learning for me personally, there's one key learning I feel, and it's actually the same learning that I had from my PhD period. Because so I'm going to start there, because when I was doing my PhD, sometimes when you do a PhD, you just go like, oh, this is so difficult. Like, I should just do something else. And then I talked to some people who were kind of came out to the other end and who already had their PhDs and just, asked for some counseling, whatever. And everyone said the same thing. And everyone said like, you just simply have to keep track of why you are doing the PhD. Like if you just remember why you're doing it, like the actual purpose of you doing this particular PhD, then, you're always going to find the way out. That's it. Just focus on that. And I felt going into business and as an entrepreneur, it's exactly the same thing. Like, it is difficult. I mean, and there are times when it's really difficult, and when you, especially, you know, as you get a bit older, you're like, well, I could take this other job, and that would be so nice, it's wonderful salary, whatever. And why am I not doing that? But the one thing that will keep you going, and just answer that question, is to just keep remembering the actual purpose and just keep repeating it. And then, and it might sound trivial, but I don't think it is trivial, because I think a purpose needs a lot of attention on its own. Like, you need to actually not just repeat the purpose, you need to, you know, challenge it and develop it and question it and talk about it and like go deeper into it. Like, you need, you know, you need to kind of, it's like your religion. You need to pray to the purpose, you know, you worship the purpose, because otherwise you forget it. Like, we can't just put a purpose on a PowerPoint somewhere and like leave it at the bottom of the file folder. Like, it's a daily activity to remember your purpose, and to calibrate whatever you're doing so that you keep feeling that this is actually the best way to go after the purpose, because maybe it's not
buying into that.
something, you know.
Yeah.
So that, you know, it's a simple learning, I guess, but I don't know. Do you recognize it from your own?
Yeah, I mean, with my company Waveless, I mean, there were, in the beginning, there's tough times, right? And you have a plan, and then you think it's all set and easy peasy. You've got a business plan, but of course there's obstacles you haven't really seen. And in these times, you need as you mentioned, you need to believe in your vision, right? Because otherwise, this is then sometimes the only source of energy for you to keep going, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Because
it's the one thing that would just keep you going. It's just like, man, you and others will think that it's because you have this stamina or you're smart or whatever, but no, it's just like that one single thing that keeps you going every day. So that little, once you get that loop going, like, no, but this is the most important thing that I can work on, and it's a clear purpose, and I just have to get it done. Then that's it. Keeps you going.
Yeah. So good one, nice one. We talked about PPAs, and from when we listen to you, then PPAs are the only way to get electricity business-wise from the solar park or from the wind farm to any source to the end customer. But there are alternatives, and why are PPAs the best?
Yes, I mean, look, there's this big controversy, and I think this is really like something that's actually controversial among customers and being debated, and being like, you can get kind of partly hot conversations going on this, but it's the question of EACS, and EACS is again, we have a strange abbreviation, but it stands for the Energy Attribute Certificate. So EAC is like a certificate that you're buying green electricity. And we look at commercial customers, power users, just a few years back, they were all saying that, oh, you know, we have 100% renewable electricity, period. And then you check, you know, what do they actually mean? And what they meant was that they were buying certificates. They were buying EACs. And they were buying EACs that were not connected to any particular action on their part. So they could buy EACs from like a wind plant that has been up and running for many years, but then suddenly the customer turns up and just starts buying the EACs. And they say that now we're buying electricity from this wind park. That's great. We have 100% renewable electricity. And increasingly, people are saying that, wait, you know, hang on a minute. Like, if you want to talk about sustainability, like if you're doing this for a sustainability perspective, then surely, you know, you must do something that changes something in this world. Like, you have to tell us, if you say that you have 100% renewable electricity, but you should probably tell us why you have made more renewable electricity. Why have your actions led to more renewable electricity? And the problem with the EACs was that there was just no reasonable way that you could claim this, because they were not that valuable. So the fact that you were buying EACs just didn't mean that anyone else started building new power plants because the EX were so valuable. It was just the other way. EX costed nothing. That was the reason why it was so simple to buy them. So this is a really, I mean, I think this is a controversial question because you still have a lot of big company brand names out there saying that, oh, we have 100% renewable electricity, but it's all EX. But increasingly, I think consensus among the people who especially sense the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals that came out of the Paris Agreement 2015 and 2016 and 2017, the SDGs became like the kind of the gold standard for how to create your sustainability actions. You can't get around that. Like SDG 7.2 just says really explicitly that you have to increase the amount of renewable electricity in this world, and you have to explain how you're doing that. And with a PPA, that's super clear. Like you sign a PPA with me, I will build a new solar site. Like that chain is just super clear, and it's like clinically proven, you know. And with the EX, like there's just no way to prove that chain. So yeah, I mean, I think that is the other way of buying renewable electricity. But I think, you know, I want to highlight that controversy and kind of flag that.
Yeah. But with the PPA, you provided 24/7 electricity, right? So that's what your customer, or how? Because
so
aren't you also dependent on these certificates because you have to cover the night, or at, let's say, no sunshine days with other electricity you buy in, or how?
So yeah, it's a good question. Like, so solar PPAs typically tend to be pay as produced, which just means that we're selling electricity when we produce it, not the rest of the time. So we're not selling 100% of the electricity that the customer needs. We're selling 30% of the electricity that the customer needs, and then they buy other electricity for the rest of the time. So we don't take the overall responsibility for the customer complete power need. We just say that whenever the sun is shining, we're going to sell you that electricity at that time.
Right. So you're selling actually to utilities because they then provide they buy the remaining kilowatt hours.
Yeah, so this
customers.
Again, you have good but technical questions. So yeah, that's it. Actually, you can sell PPAs to utilities, and a lot of people are doing that. That's
on network operators. I don't know how you would term them.
Yeah, you could sell to the network operator too, but it's usually like a utility or an energy trading company. But then you can sell PPAs directly to power users. And so if you're on the rooftop, so you're what we say behind the meter, you actually just sell the power straight into whatever they're using the power for. So it's an industry. They have a rooftop. You're selling the power right
on top of the factory itself. Okay.
Exactly. That's what we call an on-site PPA.
Yeah.
And it just means that from the side of the grid, they're just buying less energy, right?
All right.
Yeah, but then you can do an off-site PPA, and then you're somewhere else on a field, and there's a PPA with the customer. Now, the typical way we do this is actually through a financial mechanism where we're actually not like physically moving the electricity to the customer. We're just in the same electricity pricing zone as the customer. So we are here and we're selling electricity into the grid and getting paid for it. And the customer is here and they're buying electricity from the grid. And then we just make sure that we can swap the costs so that it's a contract for difference. It's like the customer, if we have a certain level, a certain price level, and if we're getting paid more than that price level from the grid, we're going to send that money to the customer.
Okay.
If we're going to getting paid less than that, we're going to take some money from the customer. But it's a financial settlement.
Okay. Then somehow sorry, you go.
Yeah, I was just going to add one last thing because you were right. You were mentioning the EX, and you're right about the fact that when you do a PPA, it's super important to transfer the EX to the customer. So you can't do a PPA without EX.
It's at least a solar PPA, a proper renewable. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just the other way, but it's just that the EX that we give the customer, they are what we call bundled EX. So the customer can say that, look, these EX, they wouldn't exist unless I, as a customer, had made it happen. Yeah. So it's additionality is the kind of like the sustainability words. The customer has created these EX themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is technical. I mean, I'm not sure if it's like
Yeah, it's.
If
I
I'm
mean,
doing a good job at explaining it, like it's.
yeah, devil's advocate. So is it very open for fraud? I mean, then basically you need to measure the meter, need smart, super precise meters everywhere
Yeah.
to measure the kilowatt hours, and so that the total sum is then somehow the correct value. And also with these, let's say, virtual certificates,
Yeah.
Isn't that a system which is super open for fraud, and maybe you can live by small effects here and there and make a billion easily?
Good question. We haven't
What about,
seen
for
that
example,
many.
transmission losses, right? You have a meter on one side and then you sell it on some other side, and then you have 10% loss on the transmission line. I
Yeah.
just realized that it's because with previous conversations, it's not straightforward, right? So when you keep asking, then it becomes a more complex and more complex, right? And you
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So I'm gonna say this. I mean, to be perfectly honest about the way our industry works, is that this simple pitch to customers is that, look, sign a simple contract, sign a PPA, and you get all of this.
Easy, yeah.
But the honest fact is that the PPA contracts as such are growing, increasingly complex. So, and I think that's necessary, and it also reflects the fact that, coming back to what we talked about earlier, pretty soon it's going to be more than just the kilowatt hours. It's going to be reliability services, etc., baked into the PPAs. And
yeah.
But there are so many reasons that PPAs can be a bit complex, and in terms of what's the shape, who is taking exactly what risk at what part of the chain. So, and I think, so if you would ask me, what's the like the downside of PPAs, or what's the difficult thing for a customer about using PPAs? I mean, I think it's that looking at that contract and understanding that contract, you do need a lot of times customers bring in an external consultant to really put pressure on us, and I mean really understand the contract. There might even be two consultants. There might be a technical consultant to kind of look at the fundamental technical aspects of PPA, but then a legal consultant to look at the legal side. So I don't think you need this when you do on-site PPAs. That tends to be straightforward.
Yeah, it's easy. You see basically, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just see how much energy you get. But when you do the offsite stuff, I mean, yeah, you do need a little bit of a team to make that work. But on the other hand, the volumes are so big, and it's the transactional, like the money involved is significant. So it probably makes sense that there should be a bit of work going on to make sure that everything is super straight and super clear.
Yeah. Is there some sort of authority, for example, in Sweden or in other countries, which then make sure that the sources and the sinks match up, and also related the euro or the money flow is kind of matches that complex system?
Yeah, we go. I mean, yeah, like there'll be a number of them. So because we use the electricity system, so there will be someone who's responsible for balancing, and there will be different settling counterparties. That's all a part of like the electricity system. You have those parties in there. And then in terms of the PPA, just making sure that like there's a PPA standard. I think that's interesting work that's increasingly being done by a number of good organizations. So people like Solar Power Europe or RE100. I mean, doing great work in making sure that the way that we approach PPAs is being standardized, and there's a common language and a common set of standards.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Very cool. So where do you see, let's say we talked about bottlenecks as your guiding principle. One of the key questions we also address here is what do you think, does solar or the wind and the renewables in general, what does it take to get that industry to the next level, to get to 100% renewable energy coverage? What's the thing where you think that's required?
Yeah, so two themes. The one theme is capital cost,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty straightforward. The other theme is reliability services. So the first theme, capital cost, I mean, the capital cost is still the largest component of cost, and for both wind and solar, the largest kind of single component of cost. And it's low. I mean, capital cost, when you finance these things, that's come down hugely. I mean, massively, and that's great. But let me be a little bit controversial here and say it should go down to zero. I mean, seriously, like this is so, and not just for, I don't know, idealistic reasons, but just because this is the most solid, future-proven, critical infrastructure that you could invest in. And when you do the math as an investor, this is where you get the least risk in the long term. So, I mean, it should go down to zero. And as it does, which is basically what's happening, I mean, the capital cost is constantly being pressured because of capital competition in these sectors. But that is still the bottleneck. So, I mean, being able to slash prices even further will demand even more capital cost pressure. And as that happens, deployment rate is going to go up even further. But so that's the one thing. But the other thing that's just as important to society, basically, I mean, to the general reception of renewables in society, is that this exact theme we have been talking about already. But as we deploy these assets, solar assets or wind assets, they have to be geared to provide reliability services back to the grid. And we have to pretty much optimize some of the assets for reliability services rather than just kilowatt hour production. That is the only way we're going to be able to go to 100% renewable and use the grid and not be a problem for society in the end, or not be a problem for, we have to be responsible stakeholders. I mean, there is a grid, we need to kind of make it work in the long term as well. And we can. We just need to make sure that's being done.
Yeah.
So those are the two big bottlenecks, I think, and the one being just about capital, the other one being about how we gear the assets, how we create the assets.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, cost of capital. I'm still surprised when you say it's the largest cost driver for the assets, because I mean, interest rates are that low already. Interesting view. Cool. Hey, Harald, anything else you wanna add?
Now, we talked about a lot of things. I mean, it was a great conversation. Yeah, no, I think you had good questions.
Yeah, good, excellent. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming onto the show and sharing your views. It's been a fantastic hour, and yeah, all the best with your business, Harald.
Yeah, thank you, Torsten, and likewise. And it's been a really nice conversation. So keep up the good work with the solar journey, and I look forward not only to hearing this one, we've already heard it, but to hear all of your future podcasts. They've been really interesting to listen to.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Harald. Bye-bye.